I went searching for my missing friend. What I found shouldn't exist. It started with a postcard, a faded image of a lighthouse perched precariously on a jagged cliff face, the kind you see in coastal Maine. On the back, a scrawled message in Elias Thorne's unmistakable handwriting. "Come find me, Black Harbor. It's real." Elias had always been obsessed with the esoteric, the cryptic, the things that lurked just beyond the veil of our perceived reality. We'd spent countless nights poring over dusty grimoires, debating the existence of ancient gods and forgotten dimensions, chasing whispers of the unexplained. But Black Harbor? That was a myth, a tall tale he'd spun during a particularly drunken night at the Serpent's Coil, our favorite dive bar, a secret fishing village swallowed by the sea centuries ago, a place where the veil between worlds was thin, where the old gods still held sway. I dismissed it then, laughed it off as another one of Elias's elaborate fabrications. But Elias didn't disappear. He vanished. No phone calls, no emails, no social media posts. His apartment was empty, his car gone, his life seemingly erased. The police investigation stalled, chalked up to a missing person, presumed dead. But I knew Elias. He wouldn't just disappear without a trace unless Black Harbor was more than just a story, fueled by a cocktail of grief, fear, and a morbid sense of obligation. I packed a bag, grabbed a map, and pointed my car north. The map was old, a tattered relic from my grandfather's days as a long-haul trucker, the kind that still showed roads that had long since crumbled back into the earth. It led me to a remote stretch of the Maine coastline, a desolate landscape of windswept pines and rocky beaches. The air hung heavy with the scent of salt and decaying seaweed, a primal aroma that stirred something deep and unsettling within me. I followed the coastline, the road narrowing with each mile, the asphalt giving way to gravel, then eventually to a rutted dirt track that looked like it hadn't been used in decades. The sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of blood orange and bruised purple. A thick fog rolled in from the sea, blanketing the landscape in an eerie shroud. Visibility dropped to near zero, and I was forced to slow to a crawl, the headlights cutting through the fog like dull yellow knives. It was then that I saw it. A sign, barely legible, half-rotted and covered in moss. It read, "Black Harbor, private property. Keep out." My heart pounded in my chest. Black Harbor. It was real. I pushed on, ignoring the warning, driven by a desperate hope that bordered on madness. The road descended sharply, winding down a steep cliff face. The fog grew thicker, swirling around the car like grasping tendrils. I felt a sense of unease, a prickling sensation on the back of my neck, as if I were being watched. Finally, the road leveled out and I found myself in a small clearing. Before me lay a sight that defied logic, a vision that shattered the foundations of my sanity. Black Harbor. The village wasn't buried beneath the waves. It was different. It existed in a pocket, a bubble of reality somehow detached from the rest of the world. The buildings were ancient, constructed from dark, sea-worn stone, their roofs thatched with seaweed. Strange symbols were carved into the walls, symbols that resonated with a primal dread deep within my soul. The air was thick with a palpable sense of wrongness, a miasma of decay and something far more sinister. There was no sign of life, no sound save for the mournful cry of gulls overhead and the rhythmic crash of waves against the shore. It was a ghost town, a relic of a forgotten age. I stepped out of the car, the fog swirling around me like a living entity. The temperature dropped dramatically, a sudden chill that seemed to seep into my bones. I felt a presence, an awareness that I was not alone. I called out Elias's name, my voice swallowed by the fog. Only silence answered. I began to explore the village, my footsteps echoing eerily through the deserted streets. The buildings were in various states of disrepair, some reduced to crumbling ruins, others seemingly untouched by time. I peered into the windows, my breath fogging the glass. The interiors were dark and dusty, filled with strange artifacts. Weathered fishing nets, corroded tools, and bizarre idols sculpted from bone and stone. In one house, I found a tattered book, its pages filled with indecipherable script and grotesque illustrations. The drawings depicted monstrous creatures with tentacles and gaping maws, beings that seemed to writhe and pulse with unnatural life. As I flipped through the pages, I felt a wave of nausea wash over me, a sense of profound dread that threatened to overwhelm me. I slammed the book shut, my hands trembling. This place was wrong, terribly, fundamentally wrong. I needed to find Elias and get out of here. I continued my search, my anxiety growing with each passing moment. The fog seemed to be closing in, pressing against me like a suffocating blanket. The silence intensified, amplifying the sound of my own heartbeat. Then I heard it, a faint chanting, a low, guttural drone that seemed to emanate from the very stones beneath my feet. It was coming from the center of the village, from a large, imposing structure that resembled a church or temple. I approached cautiously, my hand instinctively reaching for the pocket knife I always carried. The chanting grew louder, more insistent, filling the air with a sense of dread and anticipation. I pushed open the heavy wooden doors of the temple and stepped inside. The interior was dimly lit by flickering candles, their flames casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. The air was thick with the smell of incense and something else, something foul and sickeningly sweet. A group of figures stood in a circle, their faces hidden by hooded cloaks. They were chanting in a language I didn't recognize, their voices rising and falling in a hypnotic rhythm. In the center of the circle, on a stone altar, lay a figure bound and gagged. It was Elias. My blood ran cold. "Elias!" I shouted, rushing towards the altar. The chanting stopped abruptly. The hooded figures turned towards me, their faces still hidden in shadow. A tall figure stepped forward, its voice raspy and unnatural. "You should not be here," it hissed. "This place is not for you. Let him go," I demanded, brandishing my knife. The figure chuckled, a dry, rattling sound that sent shivers down my spine. "He has chosen to be here. He has embraced the truth." "The truth?" I scoffed. "What truth? This is madness." "The truth," the figure said, "is that the veil is thin here. The old gods still listen, and they demand tribute." The figure raised its hand, and the other hooded figures began to chant again, their voices growing louder and more frenzied. The candles flickered violently, casting grotesque shadows on the walls. The air grew heavy, charged with an unnatural energy. I felt a presence, something vast and ancient, watching me from the darkness. "We offer them what they desire," the figure said, "and in return, they grant us power." The figure gestured towards Elias. "He will become one with them. He will transcend the limitations of this world." "No!" I screamed, charging towards the altar. The hooded figures moved to intercept me, their cloaks swirling around them like dark wings. I slashed at them with my knife, but they seemed unfazed, their movements unervingly quick and fluid. One of them grabbed my arm, its grip like iron. I struggled against it, but it was too strong. It dragged me towards the center of the circle, towards the altar. "You will join him," the figure hissed. "You will become one with the old gods." I screamed, kicking and thrashing, but it was no use. They forced me onto the altar next to Elias. He looked at me with wide, terrified eyes. I tried to speak, but the gag prevented me from making a sound. The hooded figures began to chant louder, their voices reaching a fever pitch. The candles flickered and died, plunging the temple into darkness. Then something happened. The ground began to shake. The walls of the temple groaned and trembled. A blinding light filled the room. I felt a searing pain, as if my body were being torn apart. I saw things, visions of unimaginable horror. Ancient beings with tentacles and claws, writhing in the depths of the ocean. Endless landscapes of twisted rock and pulsating flesh. I heard voices, whispers that drove me to the brink of madness. The old gods were real, and they were hungry. The light faded and the shaking stopped. I lay on the altar, gasping for breath, my body aching all over. I looked at Elias. He was gone. In his place was a pulsating mass of flesh and tentacles, an abomination that defied description. It writhed and pulsed, its surface covered in eyes that stared at me with malevolent glee. The hooded figures bowed before it, chanting its name. It was one of the old gods, and I was trapped in its domain. I tried to move, but my limbs were heavy and unresponsive. The abomination turned its attention to me, its tentacles reaching out to caress my face. I felt a cold, slimy touch, a violation that went beyond the physical. It was probing my mind, searching my memories, devouring my soul. I screamed, but no sound came out. I was being consumed, assimilated into its being. I was becoming one with the old gods. Then, just as I was about to lose consciousness, I saw a flicker of light. A figure emerged from the shadows, its face hidden by a wide-brimmed hat. It held a strange device in its hand, a contraption of brass and wires that hummed with an unnatural energy. It pointed the device at the abomination and pressed a button. A beam of energy shot out, striking the creature in the chest. The abomination shrieked, a sound that shattered the air. It writhed and convulsed, its tentacles flailing wildly. The hooded figures scattered, their chants turning into screams of terror. The figure with the hat turned to me and offered a hand. "Come with me," it said. "We have to get out of here." I took its hand and it pulled me to my feet. My body was weak and shaky, but I managed to stand. We ran out of the temple, the abomination's screams echoing behind us. We didn't stop running until we reached the edge of the village, the boundary where Black Harbor met the normal world. The fog thinned and the air grew clearer. I could breathe again. I looked back at the village, its dark buildings silhouetted against the night sky. It looked like a nightmare, a figment of my imagination. But I knew it was real, and I knew that I could never forget what I had seen there. The figure with the hat led me to a small boat hidden in a cove. We climbed aboard and it started the engine. The boat sped away from the shore, leaving Black Harbor behind. As we sailed away, the figure turned to me and removed its hat. It was a woman, her face pale and serious. "My name is Dr. Evelyn Reed," she said. "I work for a special organization." "What was that thing?" I asked, my voice trembling. "What did I just see?" "That was an outer god," she said. "An entity from another dimension drawn to this world by the weakness of the veil." "And Elias?" I asked. He became one of them?" Dr. Reed nodded grimly. "He was a sacrifice, a vessel for the outer god to enter our world." I felt a wave of grief wash over me, a profound sense of loss. Elias was gone, consumed by a monster from another dimension. "Why were you there?" I asked. "How did you know?" "We've been monitoring Black Harbor for years," she said. "It's a nexus point, a place where the veil is unusually thin. We try to contain the entities that slip through. And you just showed up at the last minute?" I said bitterly. "You could have saved him." "We do what we can," she said. "We can't always be there in time." "What happens now?" I asked. "What are you going to do about Black Harbor?" "We'll seal it off," she said. "We'll reinforce the veil, make it harder for the outer gods to break through. But it's a temporary solution. They'll always be looking for a way in." "So this will happen again?" I asked. "It's possible," she said. "We can only hope to contain them for as long as possible." We sailed in silence for a while, the only sound the hum of the engine and the splash of the waves. I stared out at the ocean, my mind reeling from what I had just experienced. I had gone searching for my missing friend, and I had found something that shouldn't exist. Something that had shattered my perception of reality. "You can't tell anyone about this," Dr. Reed said, breaking the silence. "No one would believe you." and it would only put them in danger. But people need to know, I said. They need to be warned. It's better if they don't know, she said. Trust me, this knowledge is a burden. I looked at her, her face etched with weariness and resignation. I knew she was right. No one would believe me. They would think I was crazy. And even if they did believe me, what could they do? Fight the outer gods? It was a hopeless battle. What about me? I asked. What am I supposed to do with this? You forget, she said. We showed up just in time to stop you being merged with one of the old gods. You will be monitored, of course, but that is all. I stared at my hands, my skin crawling at the memory of the abomination's touch. How could I ever go back to a normal life after seeing what I had seen? How could I ever forget? Dr. Reed pulled into a small harbor, a sleepy town nestled in a cove. We disembarked from the boat and she led me to a waiting car. We'll take you back to your car, she said. Then you can go home. Try to forget about this. I nodded numbly. Thank you, I said, for saving my life. Just be careful, she said, and don't go looking for things that are better left hidden. She drove me back to the clearing where I had left my car. I got out and she drove away, disappearing into the night. I stood there for a moment, staring at my car, feeling like a stranger in my own life. I got in and started the engine, turning the car around and heading back the way I had come. As I drove away from Black Harbor, I knew that my life would never be the same. I had seen the other side, the dark reality that lurked beneath the surface of our world. And I knew that it would always be there, waiting to break through. A while later, I started experiencing nightmares, vivid and terrifying dreams filled with tentacles, gaping maws, and chanting figures. I would wake up screaming, my heart pounding, my body drenched in sweat. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't function. I was haunted by the memory of Elias, by the image of the abomination that had taken his place. I started seeing things, fleeting glimpses of grotesque shapes in the shadows, whispers of alien voices in the wind. I was losing my mind. I tried to tell people what had happened, but they dismissed it as stress or trauma. They told me to see a therapist, to take medication. But I knew that no therapy, no medication could ever erase what I had seen. My life became a living hell, a constant struggle to maintain my sanity in the face of unimaginable horror. I tried to forget about Black Harbor, to bury the memory deep within my subconscious. But it was no use. It was always there, lurking in the back of my mind, waiting to resurface. One night, I had a particularly vivid dream. I was back in the temple, standing before the abomination. It reached out to me with its tentacles, its eyes staring into my soul. It whispered my name, its voice a chorus of alien voices. I woke up screaming, my body trembling. I knew that I couldn't run from it any longer. I had to face it. I had to go back to Black Harbor. Against my better judgment, I started researching Black Harbor, searching for any mention of it in historical records, folklore, or occult texts. I spent hours in libraries and online, poring over dusty volumes and obscure websites. I found fragments, whispers of a cursed village, a place where the sea gave up its dead, where the old gods were worshipped. I discovered ancient maps that showed Black Harbor's location, marked with cryptic symbols and warnings. I learned about the rituals that were performed there, the sacrifices that were made to appease the entities from beyond. The deeper I dug, the more I realized that Black Harbor was more than just a myth. It was a place of immense power, a gateway to another dimension. And it was still active. It was like some force compelling me. I knew that going back was suicide, but some power far beyond me was taking me back to Black Harbor. This time I was armed. I spent weeks preparing, gathering information, and acquiring the necessary tools. I learned about sigils and incantations, protective wards, and banishing rituals. I obtained a powerful flashlight, a compass, and a sturdy backpack filled with supplies. I sharpened my knife, ensuring its edge was razor sharp, and I prayed, praying to any god that might be listening, begging for strength and protection. I drove north again, the familiar landscape triggering a wave of anxiety and dread. When I reached the familiar coastline, I knew I was close. The air grew heavy, the scent of salt and decay intensified. The fog rolled in, thick and suffocating. I parked my car a distance away, not wanting to risk being seen. I hiked through the woods, following the old dirt track that led to Black Harbor. I moved slowly and cautiously, my senses on high alert. The silence was unnerving, broken only by the rustling of leaves and the distant cry of gulls. As I approached the village, I could feel the presence again, the sense of being watched. It was stronger this time, more oppressive. I drew my knife and prepared myself for the worst. I stepped into the village, the familiar sight sending a shiver down my spine. The buildings were still there, dark and foreboding. The fog swirled around me, concealing the horrors that lurked within. I moved through the streets, my footsteps echoing eerily in the silence. I could feel the eyes on me, watching me from the shadows. I reached the temple, its imposing silhouette looming against the night sky. The doors were open, beckoning me inside. I took a deep breath and stepped through the doorway. The interior was dimly lit by candles, their flames casting grotesque shadows on the walls. The air was thick with the smell of incense and something else, something foul and sickeningly sweet. The hooded figures were there, standing in a circle around the altar. They were chanting, their voices low and guttural. But this time, there was no abomination on the altar. This time, the altar was empty. The hooded figures stopped chanting and turned to face me. Their faces were still hidden, but I could feel their eyes burning into me. "You have returned," one of them said, its voice raspy and unnatural. "We knew you would." "I'm here to stop you," I said, my voice trembling but firm. "I'm here to destroy this place." The figure chuckled, a dry, rattling sound that sent shivers down my spine. "You cannot stop us," it said. "We are beyond your comprehension. We are the servants of the old gods." "The old gods are nothing but monsters," I said, "and I'm going to send them back where they came from." The figure raised its hand and the hooded figures began to chant again, their voices growing louder and more frenzied. The candles flickered violently, casting grotesque shadows on the walls. The air grew heavy, charged with an unnatural energy. I felt the presence of the old gods watching me from the darkness. "You cannot comprehend the power of the old gods," the figure said. "They are the creators of all things. They are the masters of the universe. They are destroyers," I said. "They bring only chaos and suffering." "They bring balance," the figure said. "They bring order to the chaos." "They bring death," I said. "And I'm going to make sure they don't bring it here." I raised my knife and charged towards the hooded figures. They moved to intercept me, their cloaks swirling around them like dark wings. I slashed at them with my knife, but they seemed unfazed, their movements unnervingly quick and fluid. One of them grabbed my arm, its grip like iron. I struggled against it, but it was too strong. It dragged me towards the center of the circle, towards the altar. "You will become a sacrifice," the figure hissed. "You will appease the old gods." "Never," I screamed, kicking and thrashing. I managed to break free from the figure's grip and stumbled backwards. I pulled out my flashlight and shined it in their faces, momentarily blinding them. Then I recited the incantation I had learned, a banishing ritual designed to ward off evil spirits. The words felt strange and foreign on my tongue, but I spoke them with conviction, channeling all my fear and anger into their power. As I spoke the words, the candles flickered and died, plunging the temple into darkness. The hooded figures screamed, their voices filled with terror. The air grew colder, and the presence of the old gods intensified. I felt a pressure on my mind, a force trying to break through my defenses. But I held firm, focusing on the words of the incantation. The ground began to shake. The walls of the temple groaned and trembled. A blinding light filled the room. I felt a searing pain, as if my body were being torn apart. I saw things, visions of unimaginable horror. Ancient beings with tentacles and claws writhing in the depths of the ocean. Endless landscapes of twisted rock and pulsating flesh. I heard voices, whispers that drove me to the brink of madness. But I didn't give in. I kept reciting the incantation, my voice growing louder and stronger. The light faded and the shaking stopped. The temple was silent, the hooded figures gone. Only I remained standing in the darkness. I felt exhausted, drained of all energy. But I had done it. I had banished the old gods, at least for now. I stumbled out of the temple, my body aching all over. I could feel the darkness receding, the presence diminishing. The fog began to dissipate, revealing the stars in the night sky. I took a deep breath, the fresh air filling my lungs. I walked out of the village. I will never return to Black Harbor, but I know that the old gods are still out there waiting for their chance to return. And I know that I will be ready when they do.